If you haven't wondered how to share a personal challenge with your community or clients, you probably will. Life is full of them, and there's a one that's bound to be one you keep to yourself for a while, but that in fact may be that you can't. It could be physical and impossible to hide if you're on camera or in photos regularly, but no matter what, there's a right time and a way. So, this episode dives into how to share a personal challenge publicly. There are lots of reasons why this might come up. You go through a breakup or divorce, especially if you've shared content that includes your family. You have a health issue. There's a tragic death in the family. I'm Deborah Atkinson. You're listening to She Means Fitness Business. It's a division of my business, Voice for Fitness. And here, behind the scenes, we know you want to be an inspirational example to other midlife women. And in order to do that, we all need a profitable health and fitness coaching business. Problem is often for members in our community, a lack of clients and or a lack of revenue, putting in lots of time, which can really make you feel uncertain about whether you can succeed and keep this going in a sustainable way. And we believe you deserve consistent, dependable revenue from clients that you love. And I know exactly how it feels because even 30 years into it at 49, I ditched everything and started from scratch. And there was a moment where I was like, okay, and now is when I prove it that it works, that everything I've been teaching and doing the last 30 years, I do and apply. And I went from 0 to 6-figure months, and I believe that you can too. I do it with 3 steps, help you get more clients, help you make sure that you're getting profit from the revenue that you're gaining, and make sure you're holding on to your freedom. Time is what we really all want. So you can book a call with me to see if it's a good time for you and we are a good fit to move your business into a much more profitable space. But in the meantime, you can get the Health Fitness Professionals business scorecard so you can do a quick self-assessment and you can stop feeling like your dream's slipping away while other influencers who are less qualified and less heart-centered make sales, get more clients, earn awards, and instead, you can easily increase your revenue by at least $5,000 a month in the first 90 days. Let's dive into this. This is definitely a topic we've talked about. I've talked about. The story of flipping 50 is kind of a midlife crisis story, but it was the midlife crisis that laid the foundation for my resilience when real tragedy struck. You think it's bad, right? Until then you really experience what is hard. Defining our hard is a challenge if we've never been there before. But here are the best times to share. There are things to consider that may help you decide when to share if you have that luxury. Sometimes we don't get to decide. Remember that you may not always, if it's a physical thing, you may have to share, here's what I had planned. I can't do this. And here's what I'm doing and how I'm dealing with it. We've interviewed on this show before Natalie Jill, who is a fitness, I would say, icon, right? She's been in the weight loss space for women for about 13 to 15 years, I believe. And she's shifting gears, but she shifted gears and potentially had a wake-up call because she had a string of injuries and she ended up handling it quite publicly. And although she had tons of content and programs already up for sale, and she may or may not have had to, she decided to do it. And so when she went through a back pain issue, she went public about how she was dealing with it, what was going on, what she didn't realize, how she may have made some mistakes. And likewise, when she had another injury, I think it was a ruptured bicep, don't quote me on that, she again went through, here's what happened, here's how I'm dealing with it. And that potentially paved the way to something newer and a better relationship or a different one with her audience. And there was a choice she made and she chose to include it in her conversation. There may be times when you decide, no, this isn't something I'm ready to share or even ever want to share. So, times to share, best times after you've healed from the initial personal blow. Meaning, we have a saying among professional speakers that we don't heal from the stage. Like, it's not your story to tell yet to a public audience in order to make a point if you're still emotional when you tell it. So there's different times where someone might interview you for a story that maybe you would be emotional about it. It would still be kind of raw. But when it's your platform and this is for the benefit of your business, you want to be very careful about whether you're putting yourself into a situation where it almost feels like the audience is going to be more uncomfortable than they are comforted by the fact that you're in this. Number two is when you need to relay why you've been quiet or you've been absent. That was a situation for me during a family tragedy. This was years ago. This was 2016. And, I was regularly in my members area, in my Facebook group, doing coaching in there on a regular basis, coming up with new content, and there were reasons why, it was too raw. There was a lot going on. And there were a few weeks there where we were just coping day to day to day. And I came into my Facebook group first and shared it with them, that those are our VIPs and the members. And then from there went to email and shared pieces of the story with them. And the outpouring was fantastic. And I don't know that I was ready to receive any of that outpouring. But what I really was impressed by is that people shared similar tragedies. And, you realize very suddenly the value of that is that we don't know. We watch people walk down the street and we may judge them for not smiling at us when we smiled at them, or not saying hello when we said hello to them. And until you've been in that moment, you've been in that place where there is a reason why it's not a great day. And, when someone judges you who doesn't know the shoes you're walking in at the moment, it's just a big wake up call for you to be in those shoes and then realize all of the ways that maybe, I might have made it worse for someone, and it changes your sensitivity. The third thing is if it will help your audience members going through the same or offer prevention so they don't have to go through the same. And whether that's the same actual physical steps or it is the emotional roller coaster, I think all of those things apply. So you may recall a recent podcast episode I shared in early 2023 after interviewing one of our menopause fitness specialists, Amy. So I will link to both the podcast episode we did with Flipping 50 and this She Means Fitness Business podcast in the show notes so that you can come back to it. But again, when I reached out and asked Amy, it was because she had shared a little bit on her own timeline about what was happening. And a little behind the scenes, I think, in reaching into groups or DMs. And I said, if you're ready and you want a platform, I would love to interview you so we can share your story and I hear what you're doing. She was really very interested in helping and preventing other women from having to go through the same thing. So you want to know that's where you're at. And I asked more than once because sometimes I think we can all say yes and then be in a situation where we wish we wouldn't have, but we don't want to back out. And I wanted to give her every opportunity to do that. And I think if you are sensitive to others, if you happen to be interviewing others, and or be sensitive to yourself. You may think I'm going to do this and then decide, oh no, I can't do this. I'm not ready. And that's okay. Just realize that you've got to give yourself that. I think this too is something that I want to cover, and that is, could sharing a personal challenge, could it backfire? Sharing too much could blur your own personal and professional boundaries. It can be a challenge to make the distinction if you are a brand. So you are your brand, and meaning, your business name is actually your name, and or your name is in it, and you are the spokesperson, and you are the person delivering the coaching or the programs. Then your brand is you, and that gets a little challenging. So if your name is in the brand, for instance, it's you, right? So I chose carefully to have a brand name that was saleable later. And of course, right now I'm the only spokesperson behind it, but more and more, my preference is actually to share our members, share members' faces, share retreat images, you know, and this has a mission, a message, and a project that are all trademarked and registered that I could easily sell. And when I'm talking about flipping 50, although I come on and it's personal, I might choose, if I were sharing a story, not to share it on the flipping 50 profile page, but on my more personal page. And although that has got the same name, it's me as a spokesperson or me as a personality. So I know a friend who, as recently as 2016, was struggling as a divorced single mother, took over, or she would take her kids camping so she could Airbnb her home to make the mortgage. And yet, in 2023, she's traveling the world and she's thriving, her business, her family, and herself. To tell her story, revealing her name, number one, that would be wrong. It's not my story to tell. And it may be a story she doesn't tell for another decade because it may be too recent, too painful. It may be something that, because it involves her family members, maybe she doesn't want that out there yet for them. And it also may change the way her audience feels about her. So you have to consider, how is this going to change the way your audience feels about you? Will it change a way that they're empathetic and sympathetic? And do you want that to occur? I think it's a legit question. When I was living in a town of 50,000, I think that's actually just the mark where you can call it a city, everybody knew me because I'd been a fitness professional there for 30 years, and teaching in private gyms, teaching in churches and basements and universities, corporations. I published a weekly column in the newspaper for a period of time. I hosted a radio show weekly. I was still very private. My personal life was my personal life, and customers were customers. I remember I was working with a group of women, helping them train for a marathon. And, when you're running on Saturday morning with them, you're running 2 hours or 3 hours or sometimes more, with them. And I remember once one of the women in the group was, very forthright. She's like, "You don't share much about yourself." And I'm like, and I was just thinking, well, I'm here as the coach. I am not here as your girlfriend that you're running on a Saturday morning with, right? And I didn't say that in so many words, but I knew she also was disappointed that she didn't get dirt, But there is a time and a place, and that wasn't it. I was there to be their coach, and how are they feeling, and are they drinking enough, and are they, eating enough and fueling on the way so they don't crash and bonk? So it's important that you make these distinctions and think about it in advance. When I shared my personal story in my TEDx talk, and I will link to that as well, by the way, so that you could listen if you have not already. But it was years later, and that was my TEDx talk I gave in 2019. And the real personal story that I was telling had happened in 2013, that year and into the next. So I was speaking collectively, though, to the world, not to a small group of next door neighbors. So context is something to consider. It's sometimes easier to get up on stage and speak to a group of strangers. You'll know when you consider how it will make you and your family feel, whether it's the right time, whether it's the right audience, or it's the right context for you. And I think that it will come up. And I don't wish you, the tragedy or the crisis or the reason, but I do think that there can be benefit from it if the treatment is given correctly. Very recently, it's been within the last month, actually, or just a little bit longer than that as I record this, there was the tragedy that I spoke about when we lost a family member. A young family member was 35 and was killed while riding his bike by a hit and run driver. Actually, she left him for dead, and she was drunk and high and on probation, and then left him for dead and sped off, accelerated. They did catch her, but he was an extremely safe bike rider, extremely intelligent. He was riding with a friend. They were less than 10 minutes from home. The car drivers who saw the accident couldn't report anything about the accident because they couldn't identify the car and what happened, because they were so distracted by watching Bill fly through the air after she'd hit him with such force that he flew for about 25 feet. And even, listening to that and the reports of that in the courtroom, sharing the story takes me back to those moments. And, there is now, a reason why I shared the story. A few weeks ago, I said, how long had it been? 7 years right now? And this is the anniversary of that. And it's evidence, that life can fall apart in minutes, in seconds, and it can also come back together. There's a happier ending than there might have been tragic for the family. So the little boys were 3, 6, and 9 when their mom had to tell them dad's not coming home. And so it was a huge struggle for the first few years. Not that it's not still. They're haunted by fear and by loss, and relationships are forever changed for them. But there was a reason to tell that story now, with even time past, and how life can fall apart or seem like it is, and how it can come back together differently, not the same, not better, but differently and good. And it's also, I think, in some cases where there is a health issue or a concern, or it is emotional. Sometimes the reason why we strength train, why we exercise, talking to your clients and customers about that is not so that we can go sleeveless. It's not just so that we can do the race or do the thing or take the trip, but it's so that we are resilient when life hits us, whether that's a virus. The more fit we were, the better our immune system was. And if we got it, we healed faster. We didn't get it as badly. And, in terms of tragedy, it's an emotional stressor, but we also need that same resilience. And so, making your message clear about why you're telling your story, I think is one of the things that you need to do before you tell it. And this is what a good speaker does. When you're crafting a speech from the stage, ideally there's a rhythm of story and point and story and point all the way through. But you're choosing the story based on what the point that you want to make and need to make is. You're not just choosing a story that has maximum impact, because that would be abusing the experience. And it would be abusing, I think, the audience to simply tap into emotion to try to make a connection. Potentially you will miss. And I think that's really what you want to be considering is, why am I telling this? And what could possibly go wrong? Ask yourself that. And why will my audience benefit from hearing this? And do I need to shape the story in a specific way in order to make that true? As you may want to wait and put some buffer or bumper between the actual event and the telling of that story. I hope this has been helpful and that you can reflect on stories you do have and use them to your advantage and to your audience's advantage as well. The show notes for this one will be at a long URL. It's fitnessmarketingmastery.com/how to share a personal challenge. That's how to share a personal challenge. And I will also put a link to not only the scorecard, but the copywriting course and for my TEDx talk. So if you haven't listened to that, you may want to listen just to the treatment of the telling of that story so that there was impact, but there was a reason for doing it. And what are you waiting for? The world needs you right now more than ever.